Ahead for us this half hour, what parents should know about the vaccines. We have a pediatrician here to answer questions with young kids now eligible to get their shots.
Plus, what we can take away from the mayoral race in Buffalo. We'll have a conversation with a reporter who has covered it very closely for many months now.
And the story the numbers tell about a warm October here in Western New York and where it fits into a larger trend.
And we're glad you're here with us on this Wednesday. We'll get to all of those stories. But first up for us, a gun law here in New York State went before the Supreme Court earlier today.
A group sued, saying the law that requires New Yorkers to show a special need in order to get a license to carry a concealed weapon is unconstitutional. Justices heard almost 2 hours of arguments today, with the group behind the lawsuit saying the state of New York shouldn't second guess someone's claim of a need for self-defense. They say a concealed carry permit should be like a hunting license. To get it, you say you're going hunting. You don't have to explain why.
New York, on the other hand, says that states have always been able to regulate who carries guns in public and that this is nothing new. Right now, we're joined by NBC News Justice Correspondent Pete Williams. The best in the business. Pete, we really appreciate you being here. Can you just start by explaining to us the significance of this case and what's at stake, especially for New Yorkers watching right now here in Buffalo, since this law is affecting most of the people watching?
Right. Well, that's why it's important to New Yorkers, and it's important to the rest of the country, because this will be the first time the Supreme Court has ever said in the entire history of the country what the Second Amendment means when it talks about the right to keep and bear arms, what that means for carrying guns in public. The Supreme Court said in 2008 that the Second Amendment provides an individual right to have a gun at home for self-defense, but this is the first time the court has examined this question about, okay, what about outside the home? What about in public?
And based on the questions, Pete, that were asked and what the justices had to say, any sense of what sort of decision we could expect come June?
Yes, I think it's pretty clear that the court is going to find the New York law unconstitutional. I think they were bothered by several things. The history and tradition, as you talked about, cuts both ways, but several of the justices seem to think that it's not proper to make people apply and qualify to exercise a constitutional right. They said, for example, you don't have to get a license to exercise your right to confront your accusers in court, or the Fourth Amendment against unreasonable search and seizures, or the First Amendment, so why should it be different with the Second Amendment? But I also think that it seemed pretty apparent that the decision is going to be quite narrow, that while it may strike down New York's law that says you have to show a special need to get a concealed carry permit, the court may still allow the state to say that there are places, sensitive places, where you can't take a gun. Sports stadiums, schools, university campuses. One Justice, Amy Coney Barrett, who's probably sympathetic to the argument about the challengers who are attacking this law, said, can't we say that Times Square on New Year's Eve is a sensitive place? So it did seem like it's going to be a fairly narrow ruling, but nonetheless one that strikes down the New York law.
And Pete, we know that we have a solidly conservative court right now, 6-3 really, and this is one of the high-profile cases going before this conservative court. I know you're a busy person of late covering the justices. What are we to make about sort of that ideological shift and how that may impact these rulings?
Well, I think that ideological shift explains why the Supreme Court took this case now when it has ducked this question for 10 or 12 years. Because I think the people on the court, the most conservative justices who think laws like this are unconstitutional, have been reluctant to grant the case because they didn't know whether they had a fifth vote to agree with them. Now, with the arrival of Neil Gorsuch, but especially Brett Kavanaugh and Amy Coney Barrett, I think now they feel they have the majority they need to rule on these laws, and they've been itching to do so for a long time.
We've been chatting with Pete Williams, the justice correspondent with NBC News. You see him often on the Today Show and Nightly News as well, which, by the way, Lester Holt will anchor tonight from Washington, D.C. at 6:30. Pete, thanks so much again for your time tonight.